Hi guys, I believe, and I try to live my life anyway, that with the concept that everyone has a story, and I believe that no matter who you are, your story is powerful. One of the main reasons your story is powerful is because it tells you who you are. And of course, we're always changing and our lives are dynamic, we grow, we mature, but our stories, on the one hand, tell us who we are, but they also shape who we're becoming. And that's the power of stories. But it's not just your story telling you who you are or trying to shape who you become. There's bigger stories as well. So more than just our individual stories, there's meta stories. There's meta stories of culture, of government, your boss, your workplace, your family, your parents, marketing companies. They're wanting to shape you and form you as well. And some of these bigger stories, these meta stories, are helpful. Others are more kind of selfish and wanting to get something out of you. And actually, I think, as a follower of Jesus, I think that God has a story. And I think that God's story tells us, all of us, who we are meant to be, tells us who we are meant to be as humans. And you might go, oh, no, that's nice, Ken, but I'm not really that interested. Fair enough. But if you a little bit of patience, and maybe it might surprise you what the Bible, the story of God, actually has to say about human beings. So inside the story of God is the story of us, and it reveals facets of our identity. And one of those facets is that all human beings have access to this royal identity, where we're meant to be royal, we're meant to be kingly, we're meant to have power and prestige and an element of privilege. But I think it's worth investigating what that power, what that prestige, what that privilege actually looks like. And in saying that, I think it's worth investigating what the story of God says about us and about our royal identity. Our identity, of course, is a huge part of who we are. And I believe that the story of God sheds light on something interesting about human identity, or interesting about the human condition even. The story of God says that to be human is to have the potential for greatness in a royal identity. But to be human is also to have the potential to be corrupted into acting something less than human. And it's got to do with how we handle power. According to God's story, there's these different facets of who we're meant to be. Priests, prophets, royal. And we don't need necessarily to be born into a certain people group to have this identity. It's part of who we are as human beings. We have, as human beings, there's a priestly identity, there's a prophetic identity, there's a royal identity. And rather than flaunt this privilege and power, we're called to serve others with it. And so these facets of our identity, it's not actually about us, it's actually about other people. It's actually about community. It's actually about connecting and serving. And in today's passage, we're going to be looking at why his favorite title for himself was Son of Man, and what does Son of Man have to do with this concept of a royal identity. So I'm going to read to you from the Hebrew Bible, from the book of Daniel chapter 7, starting in verse 1. It says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. And Daniel said, 'In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being. And the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. Then I continued to watch, because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So that's the passage there. It's quite long, and it's quite vivid imagery of beasts, of humans rising up to heaven in clouds, of this figure called the Ancient of Days sitting on a throne, ruling over the universe, and it's quite vivid, quite in some ways there's imagery of horror there, and it's very interesting. That's in the Bible. But maybe just to explain it a little bit more and to give it some context, this is during the time of the Babylonian captivity of Israel. Jerusalem has been conquered by the Babylonians, and a first wave of exiles have been taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. And in that first wave of exiles, it was mostly the ruling elite and the rich who were taken first. And one of them, a young man by the name of Daniel, he was taken as a young man, and it's many years later, and he's kind of been he was kind of taken into service, serving the Babylonian government, and he's been promoted higher and higher and higher, and now he has a very high position in the Babylonian government. And because and part of why he's been promoted is because he was famous, renowned for his skill in interpreting dreams and visions. And what we've just read is a dream that Daniel had. So let me read verse 3 again. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. In this dream that Daniel shares, this vision he has at nighttime, he's referring to a succession of kingdoms and kings. And he uses the imagery of fantastical beasts. Lions with wings on them, bears with ribs in their mouth, leopards with 4 wings on their back, and horns with eyes in them. And he uses this kind of horrific, fantastical language to describe these kingdoms, to describe these kings, because these kingdoms and these kings have become monstrous. They've become more beastly, more monstrous than human in how they wield their royal power. They have a royal identity, but rather than using it to serve others, they're using it to dominate. They're using it to destroy. They're using it to fight each other. And it's kind of amazing how people, I think, and this is part of what I believe the story of God reveals about us as human beings, it's amazing how people can project a wholesome image of themselves, right? Oh, look at that person, they're great. But there's a real truism that if you want to know the character of someone, give them power and see how they use it. How will they use that power? You know, when we don't have as much power as we think we should have, you know, we can all be demurring and subservient and doing what we're told. But if we were to have power and a lot of it, how would we actually act with that power? I think we would act as who we truly are. And maybe with these kingdoms, who they truly were is that rather than being human, mostly human on the inside, they were kind of beastly on the inside, corrupted. And they used their power to destroy. They used their power to destroy, and in doing so became monsters. And I think we can see this pattern continuing today with police, governments, even businessmen using their position to cause harm. I mean, of course, not all police, not my brother's a policeman, not all governments, not all businessmen. But we can see that institutions with power, even the church, institutions with power in our society can use their positions to cause harm. And you may hear something on the news regarding a policeman or a politician or a businessman or a clergy person. You may hear something on the news that's terrible and think, they've lost their humanity. Or you might hear something terrible on the news, a heinous crime, and you think, that's monstrous. And it's interesting to me that God's story pictures human empires as beasts, as monsters. All right, let's look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, 14. And there before me, this is Daniel's vision, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. The Ancient of Days was a title used by the Hebrews to refer to Yahweh, to refer to God. And in the midst of all the monstrous chaos in this dream, monsters rising up out of the ocean, wings being torn off, horns starting to speak, God's majestic presence is described, and he is utterly unfazed by what the monsters, what the beasts are doing. God, and that's because God, the Ancient of Days, he's the one that has all power. He's the one who's in control. And the Ancient of Days has a plan, and that plan is to undo the beastliness of humanity. And that plan involves a Son of Man. There's that title, Son of Man. There's that title that Jesus uses to refer to himself. And Son of Man it's just a fancy way to say human. The Ancient of Days has a plan that involves a Son of Man or a human who will fully carry his image truthfully and faithfully, who will deal with power in a healthy way. And so in this vision, other humans have become kings and been unfaithful in their calling to be royal like God is royal. Human kings, up until now, in that vision, have carried more death than life, and in doing so have become monstrous, have become beastly. God's plan to fix everything that's been broken and undo all the exploitation and undo all the corruption that the monsters are doing centers completely around this human, this Son of Man, who's revealed later in the Bible as Jesus, later on in the story of God. And the phrase Son of Man is the way Jesus most commonly refers to himself. Jesus is the true human, the Son of Man, worthy of worship of the nations. And that's really important, in that in the Hebrew Bible, there is a human figure who receives worship, because in Hebrew thought, only God was worthy of worship. So a way to reconcile that is that this figure, this true human, is actually identified with God. This true human is also the true God. Not only is Jesus the true human, he's also the true God. And together, as fully human, fully God, he shows us what it means to be the true king, of what true royalty looks like. That it's not about dominating and oppressing and exploiting and becoming monstrous and beastly. Actually, power is given for another reason. Daniel chapter 7 verse 14 says, he was given authority, this is the Son of Man. The Son of Man was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So, this image in a dream by Daniel, in a vision, this prophetic image of Jesus in Daniel's dream was to be a king. Jesus is to be a king. Jesus is a king that represents every nation, not just one empire or one ethnicity. If you think about it, most governments look after their own, and their power is often used to exploit those outside their own system. Jesus is different. Jesus is inclusive of all human beings. Jesus represents all humans. He would love all people, independent of where they were born. He would love them all, serve them all, welcome them into his kingdom. The empires and power of the beasts would come and go, but Jesus' kingdom would never be destroyed. Jesus' kingdom will never be destroyed, according to the story of God. Jesus has and will have dominion that doesn't pass away like human kingdoms. And Jesus has and will have a kingdom that will never be corrupted, because Jesus is not corrupted by power. He has all power. He is the Ancient of Days. He is truly, fully human, truly, fully God. So this story of God, which I believe contains the story of us, shows us that the royal identity in us, just like a priestly identity or prophetic identity, can be a double-edged sword. There's potential for great healing as well as the potential for great harm. But perhaps, and that's with all three of the facets of our identity, prophetic, priestly, royal. But perhaps the distance between harm and healing is greatest with our royal identity compared to the others, compared to a priestly or prophetic identity. Because the royal identity that all humans have access to is the facet of our identity which is most closely tied with power. And that power is a source of temptation to hoard and gather privilege just for ourselves and to live with a sense of entitlement. But just because there's that incredible temptation and ability for corruption, I don't think that we should run away from it. I don't think that's what the story of God is calling the story of humanity to react. I think, or at least for me, with my relationship with the royal identity inside of me, how I try to cultivate the royal identity inside of my children, I look to the one who shows all of us humans, how to be a new kind of human. I look to the one with a new kind of relationship with power. I look to Jesus. If Jesus is the Son of Man who receives worship from the nations in Daniel chapter 7, if Jesus is the true human, true God, if Jesus is the true King, then I don't need to be afraid of the royal identity in me corrupting me, because I have a model. I have someone helping me live out a healthy royal identity inside of me. A royal identity that is not just about me, but is a blessing to those around me. But those are just my thoughts. I wonder what you think. Here are some questions that hopefully provoke some discussion. Firstly, where do you see power becoming beastly in the world today? Do you see what institutions, what individuals? Have you seen this inclination in your own life? Okay, I mean, have we seen it out there? Have we seen it in here? Second group of questions. How does seeing Jesus as the true human and the true King shape the way we think about power and our relationship with it? What kinds of power or influence do you actually have in your everyday life? Now, we can think, oh, I've got no power, I'm poor, I'm a stay-at-home mum, or whatever. There's all sorts of reasons why we think we don't have power or influence. But just take a little bit of a stock take and let's brainstorm. What kind of power do you actually have at home, at work, in church, in friendships, in community? And then finally, Jesus says he came not to be served, but to serve. How does that kind of reshape this idea of being royal? And what would it look like this week for you to live out your royal identity through service? Well, hopefully that provokes some discussions. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And that's all from me. Thanks, guys.